An armed conflict lasting half a century may finally be over with a peace deal reached in Colombia. I'm Elaine Reyes in Washington, D.C. This is a special edition of America's Now.
After 4 years of intense negotiations, the Colombian government has signed a ceasefire deal with the Farc. But with a public approval vote pending and emotions still raw, can they keep the peace?
Coger las armas y hacerlo. Así mismo estamos haciendo la 10ª conferencia.
We're putting the guns down to take the political path. This will never be forgotten by history.
Vamos a irnos a la vida política. Quiere decir que eso quedaría imborrable en la historia.
We'll get reaction from residents voting yes to the accord.
A lot of conflicting emotions, lots of happiness. I can finally say I live in a country filled with peace.
And also voting no.
No estamos en contra de la paz.
We're not against peace. We're against an agreement that was wrongly proposed and negotiated in secret.
As rebels prepare to leave the jungle for a future of harmony and high hopes.
Welcome to the show. Colombians are taking part in a historic vote not to choose a leader, but instead to ratify the peace agreement between the government and the Farc. They are not taking the decision lightly, but the answer to the question is not as obvious as it seems. Correspondent Michelle Begay has the story from Bogota.
Exhilaration as hundreds of Colombians watched the live announcement of a historic ceasefire deal between the Colombian government and Farc rebels. The end of 52 years of armed conflict is welcome news for Alejandra Montes. She says she hopes her son will never have to live through the violence she's witnessed.
Mi abuelo fue asesinado por el ELN y mi tía militó en el M-19 y fue torturada por el ejército. No puedo odiar ni al Estado ni a la guerrilla y tengo que perdonarlos.
Forgiveness and reconciliation is a sentiment felt by most gathered here.
Sentimientos encontrados, mucha felicidad. Es un momento histórico. Por fin puedo decir que vivo en un país en paz.
Lo digo como defensora de víctimas del conflicto armado y como defensoras de mujeres víctimas de violencia de género. Estoy sumamente orgullosa de quienes se sentaron en la mesa y de los compañeros y de las compañeras que hoy estamos apoyando este proceso.
But once the initial elation subsides, comes questions. After 4 years of negotiations, what did the government and rebel group agree to? President Juan Manuel Santos said Colombians will have a chance to read the 297-page deal and cast a vote on October 2nd. Yes, if they agree with the accord. No, if they don't. Most importantly, if the no vote wins, the deal is off.
Colombia dice no! Colombia dice no!
The campaigning for what could be the most important vote in Colombia's history has been heated as citizens take to the streets to bring in the votes.
Supporters of the no vote have chosen this spot in Bogota in front of the building El Nogal because President Juan Manuel Santos is here right now holding a forum on the benefits of the peace accord.
The no vote has rallied people of all ages and backgrounds.
A lot of people in the international community are asking themselves, why are people voting no in Colombia to the peace process?
No estamos en contra de la paz, estamos en contra de un acuerdo mal planteado, a escondidas, y un tema que a mí me preocupa mucho personalmente, irremediable, porque una vez se apruebe, en el futuro queda la cláusula que esos acuerdos nunca más se van a poder modificar del delito político.
No supporters like 28-year-old Hernán Cadavid want changes on the issue of justice. Under the peace deal, a special tribunal will award reduced sentences and community service in exchange for full confessions from the rebels. María Eugenia Cárdenas wants jail time.
¿Cómo es posible de que no, por lo menos, si se sentaron, no dijeron perdón, nos equivocamos, hicimos mal?
63-year-old Fernando Rojas fought against the rebels for decades as a soldier of Colombia's armed forces. He is opposed to the fact the guerrilla group will have non-voting representation in Congress until 2018, after which it can officially participate in elections.
Yo no veo a un Obama llamar al grupo ISIS o ISIS y decirles, hombre, déjenos de asesinar, o al que colocó las bombas en los aviones bombas, misiles en las Torres Gemelas. Vengan, dialogamos, no nos sigan poniendo misiles. Les vamos a dar curules en el Congreso, con carros blindados, no hay ningún problema, y los perdonamos. Yo no veo a un presidente de Estados Unidos haciendo eso. ¿Por qué en Colombia lo tenemos que hacer?
Yo viví en zona de guerrilla 7 años, de presidenta de Junta de Acción Comunal de una vereda campesina, a hora y media de Bogotá, y llegó un momento en que mataban a un campesinito delante de los nietos para robarle una vaca. Secuestraban a todos los de las fincas vecinas.
The Farc guerrilla group's history of kidnappings is something that is hard to forget.
Es muy especial con todo el mundo y donde vea que hay necesidades, más ayuda, más colabora.
On February 11, 1999, Amalia Marquez's son, Enrique, was kidnapped by the Farc when arriving to his office in Bogotá.
Por lo primero porque él el día que nos llamó nos dijo, me tienen las Farc, no se preocupen, me están tratando bien, no es con ustedes ni es conmigo, es con el gerente de la cooperativa que tiene que dar unas explicaciones.
For the next 10 years, 34 released Farc hostages confirmed that Enrique was being held hostage by the rebel group and was in fact alive. But it's been 6 years since they last heard anything.
Tengo la esperanza de volverlo a hacer. Pero también, en este momento lo que queremos es saber algo.
One of the Farc peace negotiators, known by his alias, Romania, is named as one of the culprits of the kidnapping. He has not claimed responsibility.
Pues si ellos quisieran la paz, habían empezado por la verdad. Pero es que decirlo es muy fácil. Y sentirlo es diferente.
Amalia says she doesn't know what her vote will be on October 2nd.
Entonces, ¿cómo puedo yo escoger el sí o escoger el no si no tengo? ¿Qué base tengo? Un dolor inmenso que no me permite pensar ni por el sí ni por el no.
Pertenecen a diferentes grupos políticos y pues tuvimos una conversación.
For those who are undecided, debates on the topic are being held throughout the country. In Bogotá, a youth group watches Congresswoman Claudia López, in favor of the peace deal, debate fellow Congressman Carlos Holmes, who will vote no.
No más, no perdamos un minuto más con esos tipos. Quitémosles las armas, quitémosles las cocas, recibámosles las minas, hagámonos cargo de este país que se llama Colombia, seamos capaces de gobernarlo.
Natalia Arevalo came to the event with her friends to understand the arguments behind a no vote.
Las preocupaciones existen, pero hay que pasarlas y comenzar a mirar un poco hacia el futuro, hacia la reconciliación, hacia entender a los demás, ver la otredad y de verdad darnos cuenta qué es lo que queremos.
After the debate, these women say they have reaffirmed their decision to vote yes.
El último bastión de la Guerra Fría, la última guerrilla de Latinoamérica, está por fin dando sus armas y nosotros, los colombianos, dijimos que nos interesa, que por favor sigámonos dando bala 1 año, 2 años, 52 años más. Entonces creo que es el mensaje errado, o sea, si por fin ellos están cediendo, pues ¿por qué no dar una oportunidad, no?
Should Colombians give this peace deal a chance? For the Tarquino family, the passionate debate has divided their household.
Que de los grandes cabecillas
¿qué va a hacer? O sea, van a salir de Cuba a tener sus sillitas ya en el Congreso y pasaron, como quien dice, derecho, con una renta del gobierno, con una renta de nosotros los colombianos. Entonces sí pienso que eso me parece como injusto, o sea.
Alejandro says he shares some of his wife's Karem's concerns, but his vote is swayed when he thinks of Colombia's future generations.
El niño está en la guerra porque le toca, no porque quiere. Y yo pienso el proceso de reclutamiento de las FARC como es. Llegan a tu casa, si tú eres un campesino, y palabra más palabra menos te dicen o tu hijo viene conmigo o lo mato. Yo definitivamente pienso que qué tal yo hubiera sido el campesino que le hubiera tocado la puerta y se hubieran llevado a Pacho. Yo me hubiera muerto. Entonces, esa es mi posición y por eso voy a votar que sí.
It's a simple yes or no question, but no matter who wins on October 2nd, the result will have a profound impact on Colombia's future for generations to come.
Colombia has 34 million registered voters. In order for the peace agreement to be ratified, 13% of those voters must vote yes.
Coming up.
A chronology of the long-armed conflict in Colombia.
In order to move on, it was time to look for a way out, and that the conflict had to end, and most of Colombian society was also so sick of the war and the over half-century conflict.
America's Now.
I hope it gets to a good end because it's been difficult. It's like 4 years they've been in Cuba, but I think that Colombia needs that. You know, it's like we deserve it. We deserve it. After all these years, we deserve what is going to happen, but it's going to be difficult.
Welcome back. Colombia has walked a long path of violence to reach the prospect of lasting peace. Several decades of violent social conflict all began with the impoverished Colombian peasantry and their demand for better land distribution. But their desire for equality goes back decades before the formation of the Farc rebel group. Here's a look at the last 5 decades to where we are today. 1964. This was the year the Farc guerrilla group was born. The Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia wanted better land distribution among Colombians. During this volatile time, a second group, the National Liberation Army, or ELN, formed out of a desire for a more representative government. Both pledged to control half of Colombia with 15,000 armed men and women. Years of violence followed. 1984, the first peace attempt. President Belisario Betancourt established the first ceasefire and open peace talks with the rebels. It failed months later. 1991, a second try at peace. With the help of Venezuela and Mexico's governments, then Colombian President Cesar Gaviria started a conversation with the armed groups. The first meeting took place in Caracas, then near Mexico City. This also failed. 1995 saw the birth of paramilitaries. Several right-wing armed groups formed to protect the landowners and their properties from guerrilla attacks. This complicated the conflict in Colombia, and the groups became associated with drug cartels. Several leftist politicians were killed by paramilitary forces. 1996, various paramilitary forces united and formed the Autodefensas Unidas de Colombia, or the AUC. 30,000 armed men came together and started the so-called death squads. 1998 to 2000, a third attempt at peace. President Andrés Pastrana fulfilled his campaign promise to initiate talks with the Farc. 1 year later, the government agreed on a controversial demilitarized zone, or safe haven, for the rebels. Soon both sides exchanged prisoners. The Farc freed 359 captives, and in return, the government freed 14 guerrilla members. 2002 was known for high-level kidnappings. The peace talks were interrupted after the FARC allegedly hijacked a plane with a Colombian senator and his companions on board. The government ordered the FARC out of the demilitarized zone. Presidential candidate Ingrid Betancourt and campaign manager Clara Rojas were also kidnapped and held hostage for years. Hundreds of people were killed during this period. 2003 to 2006, no negotiating. The conflict intensified as President Alvaro Uribe promoted the demobilization and amnesty of the paramilitaries. Around 30,000 gave up their arms and confessed to their crimes. During this period, the army was accused of killing around 3,000 civilians. Several military personnel were indicted, including relatives and cabinet members of Uribe. 2012, another shot at lasting peace. President Juan Manuel Santos tries again. His administration approves the Victims of Land Restitution Law. It provides reparations and restores land to the many displaced by the conflict. The FARC announces the end of kidnappings, and soon negotiations begin in Havana between the government and the rebels. 2014 to 2015, a deadline for peace. After months of talks, both parties reach a breakthrough on the major issues in September 2015. Re-elected President Santos met with FARC leader Rodrigo Londoño, also known as Timochenko. Both committed to a 6-month deadline to get a final deal signed. The FARC announces a unilateral ceasefire. 2016, the Colombian government announces a peace accord with the FARC. The signing ceremony took place on September 27th in Cartagena. Colombians voted on October 2nd in a referendum to ratify the deal. And the country's second largest guerrilla group, the ELN, decided to start their own peace talks. For more on the peace agreement and what lies ahead, we're joined by political analyst Laura Carlson. She's been closely following the peace talks and negotiations since they began 4 years ago. Laura, welcome back to the show. What was the most difficult part of this entire peace process, or is it still yet to come?
Well, first of all, in these 4 years, what we've seen that took the most time was the most difficult was this last part, which were the sections on victims and ending the conflict. And it was most difficult because, first of all, with victims, you have years of atrocities to, in some way or another, atone for. There's a question of reparations. How do they get on with their life and recuperate some of what they've lost? And then ending the conflict, the biggest and the thorniest issue by far was a question of punishment. Who will pay for the atrocities that were committed on both sides, both by government armed forces and by the FARC? It's here that we've seen a lot of opposition to the agreement itself, with the feeling, especially by former President Uribe and his followers, that the FARC is not paying a heavy enough price for the years of warfare. But the agreements were possible because both sides came to the agreement that in order to move on, it was time to look for a way out, and that the conflict had to end. And most of Colombian society was also so sick of the war and the over half-century conflict that they were able to negotiate an agreement that was acceptable to both sides.
President Santos won re-election by promising a risky referendum, just as former British Prime Minister David Cameron did with the Brexit. Why did President Santos take this risk?
The peace process is extremely complicated, and it was very important for the government in order to know that it was going to move forward to have a popular mandate, to know that Colombian society, the majority, were behind this peace process. And that's why not only is there a plebiscite, but there's a quorum. There has to be a certain level of people who vote. The programs that are in place as a result of these years of negotiations are very complicated and require the involvement of the entire society. At the beginning, the FARC was against putting this requirement that there be a referendum at the end of the process because they didn't want to expose themselves, go into a peace process, and have, after years of negotiations, it be reverted by a popular vote and be back at step one. However, they were willing to concede that because of the commitment on both sides to the process. A referendum is a very risky thing. In Brexit, we saw the results of that risk, and this has been close. The polls have flip-flopped at times, but it was necessary in order to assure that the peace process could go forward with the support of society.
Laura, critics have called attention to the wording of the plebiscite and that the phrasing of it could have influenced a yes vote. If voters were specifically asked if they support a peace agreement with the FARC, they would likely be more no votes. So what have been some of the other concerns, especially in the agreement?
It's very unlikely that if the wording were different, the vote would be considerably different. After 4 years of negotiations, Colombians know what this is all about, and in fact, they're highly polarized in terms of their positions regarding the final agreement. The wording is, do you accept the final agreement to end the conflict for a lasting and durable peace? And it's a simple yes or no vote. And so people are going to go to the polls knowing what they're going to answer. The biggest problem is the problem of whether or not the FARC is being punished enough for the atrocities during the war. And there are many people that believe that there should have been a military solution, which is the complete annihilation of the FARC. However, after 52 years of war, many people had come to the conclusion that physical annihilation of the FARC was going to be impossible or was going to be extremely costly in terms of human lives, and for this reason the government was willing to enter into the peace agreement. Making sure that the peace agreement sticks will be one of the major concerns in the future. The United Nations is going to be verifying the disarmament process, which will take place over a period of 6 months. One of the other concerns is how the FARC members are reintegrated into society and how they're integrated into the political process as they now go from being an armed opposition to a political party.
Describe for us a post-referendum Colombia. What happens next, and can FARC members really become true members of society?
The leader of the FARC, Rodrigo Londoño, was very clear in that they were laying down the arms and they were going through this transition to become a social force and a political force. There was no ambiguity in that intention, and the government has accepted their word on this. What the programs that are set up in order to reintegrate the FARC are very comprehensive and they're very difficult, no doubt about it. They have to convince communities to accept members of the FARC back into the communities. They have to create some 7,000 jobs for guerrilla members who will be reintegrated into society. And they have to carry out a number of training programs so that young people and older people who have spent considerable time in the guerrilla, in the armed forces, will be able to reintegrate in peaceful jobs that will contribute to society and to building the peace itself. All this is a tremendous challenge, there's no doubt about it. But if Colombia, with the support of the international community, takes up that challenge in good faith, then the entire world has a possibility to see a successful peace process, and that's a huge sign of hope.
Political analyst Laura Carlson in Mexico City, thank you so much for joining us on America's Now.
Coming up.
Building a new future for Colombia after war.
I didn't come to Colombia to make war. I came to Colombia to help building a better society.
America's Now.
Many of the experience that we have in 1998 were taken by President Santos, and I think it's go a step forward. But I think that our responsibility is to create the best scenario so that we could achieve a long-lasting peace in Colombia, and that is done by a consensus.
Welcome back to America's Now. FARC leaders and delegates recently met up in a remote jungle of Colombia for their 10th guerrilla conference. For the very first time, the gathering was open to the public as the group discussed, then voted to approve the peace accord. Journalists from all over the world were invited as well to witness the historic event. Correspondent Toby Muse was there with the FARC and brings us this report.
A historic moment.
Delegados a la conferencia han dado su respaldo unánime al acuerdo final de La Habana, reafirmando.
With these words by the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia's Iván Márquez, the FARC announced it had approved the deal with the government, taking Colombia a step closer to ending one of the world's longest-running civil wars. Over 200 delegates of the FARC voted to lay down their arms and transition from an armed insurgency to a political party at the group's 10th General Conference.
Como se hizo la primera conferencia de la FARC, donde se aprueba coger las armas y hacerle, así mismo estamos haciendo la 10ª conferencia, que es la que estamos diciendo vamos a hacer de acción de armas y vamos a irnos a la vía política. Quiere decir que eso quedaría imborrable en la historia.
We first met the legendary guerrilla fighter known as Kunta Kinte in a jungle camp a year ago. At that time, the FARC and the government were still negotiating. The rebels were abiding by a unilateral ceasefire, but the government soldiers were still clashing with the rebels. Kinte was armed and ready for any confrontation. Now, a year later, he's supporting the peace process. The next step is for the FARC to enter into protected areas which will be verified by the United Nations and begin the process of disarming. The vote caps off a week of parties and concerts, reflecting a sense of optimism among guerrillas that peace is near. Over 1,000 guests and journalists mingled with more than 1,000 guerrillas. FARC guerrillas say they're looking forward to leaving the jungles, their home for the past 52 years. Yuli and Edison are like any other young couple in love, except they're leftist guerrillas in the FARC. Like thousands of other guerrillas, they hope a peace process with the government will bring their war to an end.
Ya se acaba el conflicto, ya lo entre matando entre nosotros mismos, entre colombianos, ¿no? Porque aquí no, entre mismos campesinos, gente pobre, porque aquí somos puros pobres los que estamos.
They've been together for 5 months. Relationships like these are common in the FARC. 40% of the fighters are women. They dream of starting a new life after the war. He wants to be an engineer or a doctor.
Pues mis anhelos es estudiar Derecho y si no puedo, entonces estudiar, o sea, ser comunicadora social.
The war brought them together. It ripped Anselmo Peraham's family apart. He says his daughter Luz Adriana joined the FARC 7 years ago. Since then, he's heard nothing.
Entonces vine a ver y me acaban de decir que probablemente no tengo perdido todo. Entonces,
he's come to the FARC's conference to look for her. He thanks the peace process for a chance to try to find his daughter.
Creo que con la bendición de este proceso de paz, esto es una bendición.
When he finds her, he plans on making up for lost time.
Pues la queremos mucho, necesitamos verla y hablar con ella. Nomás le respetamos las decisiones de ella.
To every guerrilla, he shows the photo of his Luz Adriana and asks the same question. Have you seen my daughter? So far, the answer is always no. Anselmo keeps looking. Back in the camp, the young couple hope that they can have a baby, an impossible dream when they were in daily combat with the army.
Porque no hemos podido porque el conflicto del otro no ha dejado, ¿no?
Hopes of love and babies, all born out of the end of the war in Colombia. The FARC insists that even as it lays down its weapons, it's not giving up on its goal of taking power and turning Colombia into a Marxist-Leninist state. I sat down with the guerrilla known as Iván Márquez, considered the FARC's second in command.
Para poder luchar también por llegar al gobierno.
To get a clearer idea of what the FARC as a political party will look like, I spoke with the guerrilla known as Alexandra Nariño. She started by explaining how a Dutch woman came to join the FARC.
When I came to Colombia for the first time, I saw the social injustice. I saw people living on the streets. I saw very rich people, very poor people, but I also saw a guerrilla on the countryside fighting for a cause.
What can you tell us about the FARC as a political party?
We want a wide, open, united party or movement. We are convinced that the left in Colombia needs unity. When you go to FARC camps, when you go to those areas, you can also see that we do have work with the population. We do have a long construction of mass organizations. In the FARC, we have always said that we don't like to take some model, for example, Russia, for example, Cuba, Venezuela. There are many things we like about, for example, about Cuba. I like the fact, for example, that in Cuba, you don't see people living on the streets, families like in Colombia. I like the fact that in Cuba, everybody has education, for example. In Venezuela, there are also things that I like, but I think that every country is special. Every country has its own history.
What will you do in the future?
Whatever Colombia needs to do. I mean, I didn't come to Colombia to make war. I came to Colombia to help building a better society.
The FARC's biggest worry is that the government will not hold up its end of the bargain and will not take down the guerrillas' old foes, the illegal far-right paramilitaries. The guerrillas say that they are ready for the ups and downs of the peace process, downs that could mean the murder of various demobilized guerrillas.
Que sabemos que van a haber altos y bajos, los van a haber, pero las ganas pueden más, y la gana es la paz tendrá que ganar, porque de pronto un loco por ahí le pegue un balazo a otro, bueno, eso se puede dar, pero no podemos caer en la tentación de que porque sucedió un caso aislado nos vamos a tirar la paz de los colombianos. No, nosotros tenemos que luchar y seguir luchando por la paz de Colombia.
But they warn that if the political violence is unrestrained, as it was in the 1990s, when 5,000 members of a left-wing political party were murdered, the FARC would have to return to the jungles.
Ah, no, ahí sí ya no habría nada. Si se viene como el genocidio de la Unión Patriótica, así ya no es la FARC, es el pueblo el que tiene que preguntar y tienen que responderle qué es lo que está pasando. Eso ya es un problema del pueblo.
¿Qué harían ustedes?
Tienes que exigir. Bueno, nosotros qué hemos de hacer, pues organizarnos otra vez, organizarnos en armas, porque qué más.
The war dragged on for half a century. The peace process lasted nearly 4 years. Now an equally long job begins, to build a new Colombia where old enemies can live side by side in peace.
Some of the guerrilla members are optimistic about the future, but others aren't so sure if Colombia can overcome the issues that led to armed groups.
Coming up.
A Colombian journalist talks about forgiving the unforgivable.
In countries like Colombia, where the rate of reading is low, the media has a duty to inform as well as educate.
America's Now.
lo que se está viviendo en Colombia es importante. Es importante que la FARC, que los grupos en conflicto logren acuerdos con el gobierno, se logren acuerdos, ¿no? Pero es importante que los colombianos sepamos que hay muchos colombianos que históricamente no la han pasado muy bien, ¿no? Y yo creo que si trabajamos sobre eso va a ser mucho más fácil.
Welcome back. Colombia is a country where kidnappings, extortion, and killings were part of the norm. Stories of hope, love, and respect were hardly ever heard of. In an effort to change the mind of her fellow countrymen, journalist Claudia Palacios decided to travel across her nation to ask one question: would you forgive? The answers are found in a book titled Forgiving the Unforgivable. Claudia Palacios is this week's Urban Voice.
It's 6:30 in the morning, and like many Colombians, Claudia Palacios starts her day early in the city of Bogotá, this nation's capital.
Vi en esta carrera algo que me gusta y es el servicio.
Las selecciones de fútbol masculinas de Colombia.
¿Tú piensas que ya te quedas acá?
Colombia es un país que ofrece muchos hechos de interés para la región, solamente con el proceso de paz en curso, pues ahí, eso es una noticia de carácter mundial.
She's a respected journalist and a writer too. Palacios is interested in politics and current events. Moderating forums are part of her routine. This one takes place at Universidad Javeriana, one of the oldest universities in the country.
Con la realidad que vive el país.
The conference is about the city mayor's new development plan.
Hay que escuchar a la ciudad.
Her involvement in public events shows her commitment to serving the community.
En países como Colombia, donde el índice de lectura es tan bajo, los medios, además de informar, deben educar.
En junio de 1964 creamos un programa en el que se dio a conocer a toda la opinión pública. El movimiento es un movimiento de autodefensa.
Nacen las Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias FARC.
En Colombia hemos contado tanto la guerra que las víctimas ya tienen respecto a los periodistas cierto cansancio.
No se quisiera que en realidad hubiera más. A ver si uno puede, pronto, ya el pueblo pueda progresar.
Todos queremos la paz y esperemos que esto sea cierto.
Palacios has met with over 100 of her fellow Colombians, including politicians, ex-guerrilla members, and victims of the war in her country. Their topic of conversation? The consequences derived from over a half-century of violence and anger. The result? Chronicles of hope.
Está el caso de Marta Mora.
Aquel caballero negro me abraza y pronuncia aquellas mágicas palabras. Yo no tengo paz. Perdóneme, señora.
Es una mujer a la que los paramilitares le asesinaron a su marido. Ella quedó sola con sus 2 hijos. Y ella, que es toda chiquitica, encaró al asesino de su marido. Y le dice, ¿cómo hizo eso? ¿Por qué? ¿Por qué? Y él empieza a llorar. Y ellos viven ahí un momento en que terminan abrazados, llorando.
Y lloramos. Y temblé. No de miedo, sino de sublime comprensión, y pude saborear, gracias a Dios, el néctar dulce del perdón.
These are the stories about victims, their victimizers, and their will to overcome hate and fear through art, sports, faith, or simply love. All covered in over 300 pages.
Pedí perdón por haberlo insultado al que mandó a matar a mi hijo, Teresita Gaviria. Cada vez que a Teresita le suena su teléfono celular, se oye la voz del cantante Rubén Blades.
Despiertas.
Que alguien me diga si ha visto a mi hijo. Es estudiante de premedicina, se llama Agustín, es buen muchacho. El buen muchacho de Teresita es Cristian Camilo Quirós Gaviria y no es su único desaparecido.
Her book, which translates into Forgiving the Unforgivable, invites the reader to contribute to a permanent peace.
Yo, cuando decidí hacer el libro, lo hice con la intención de contar que la guerra se puede superar. Por eso es un libro que, aunque narra historias de tragedia, siempre terminan en algo que tiene que ver con esperanza.
Like many of her fellow Colombians, Palacios was born into a nation of violence, although she isn't a direct victim of the conflict. She encourages a change and believes that there are other ways to a peaceful life, something that can be achieved by what she calls little peace agreements.
Pero para responder tu pregunta, esperemos un momentico aquí, Ramiro. Después de haber hecho 126 entrevistas por todo el país para mi libro Perdonar lo Imperdonable, creo que ha faltado que la ciudadanía entienda que la construcción de la paz es un tema de todos. La paz realmente verdadera, sostenible, es algo que cada quien, desde el rol que desempeña en la sociedad, sea panadero, sea madre de familia, sea ama de casa, sea ingeniero, sea arquitecto, sea periodista, debe construir, poniendo su talento, su conocimiento, su tiempo, sus recursos a la construcción de la paz.
So, is it possible to forgive?
Sí es posible. Estas víctimas que dieron su testimonio para el libro y muchas otras que no caben ahí, han demostrado que sí es posible. Lo más común es que perdón sea un regalo que la víctima se hace a ella misma y no a su victimario. Porque la víctima, en el momento que perdona, se desconecta del pensamiento sobre su victimario. Ya piensa en otras cosas. En términos de ese significado de perdón, es que es posible perdonar lo imperdonable.
Colombia has yearned for peace for decades, and through the many years, many governments, and many attempts at resolution, it finally seems that this nation can write a new chapter in its history.
Hay muchas cosas por resolver, pero pues es el inicio.
El tipo no me decía nada.
Through Palacios' stories, the reader is educated and invited to contribute to their peaceful and sublime future.
Pero le dije que lo perdonaba.
According to Palacios, most of the violence is not the product of the conflict, but the way Colombians cope with everyday problems.
America's Now.
Finally, as Colombians vote on the peace deal, many took to the streets to express their thoughts. We leave you with some of the colorful demonstrations on the streets of Colombia. Thanks for watching this special edition of America's Now. We'll see you again next week.
Supondrá la apertura de un nuevo capítulo.
Reparar. Aceptando que las normas de derecho internacional son no previstos por el derecho vigente, la persona humana queda abajo.
Política violenta y vamos a ver a gente nueva que no hemos visto hasta ahora compitiendo en política, compitiendo por sus ideas pero sin armas.
internacional para que se acabe esta guerra fratricida, este conflicto armado que hemos vivido por siglos.
Intención de cumplir lo acordado.
Con la participación de todos los colombianos y colombianas.
De los fallos proferidos por la Corte Interamericana de Derechos.